Volume 4 was so much more different than the other 3 volumes before it. In those, you were capable of following groups. You were either following the entirety of Team RWBY or the whole of Team Juniper. But those were the ones you followed. In Volume 4, everyone from RWBY has separated, and because of this, there are so many more perspectives that need to be focused on. We kept switching back and forth between the members, and what appears at the end of Volume 4, everyone is heading to the same destination, all coincidentally at the exact same time. Aside from Blake, of course. She, as of right now, appears to be holding her ground in Menagerie. But what if I told you that each of the perspectives we were following were all happening at different moments in time? There was a 6 to 8 month time skip in between Volume 3 and Volume 4. Each member of RWBY branched off at the exact same moment. And what? We're just supposed to believe that 3 of Team RWBY's members are meeting up at almost the exact same moment in time as well? The storylines I feel safe in saying took place in the order as we saw them were Oscar's and Salem's storylines. So, where does everyone else's stories fall within that time skip? Well, in comes the theorizing. Keep in mind these can of course be wrong on my part. Feel free to form your own frame of reference. I'm just gonna try my best to place each one of them properly. Let's start with Weiss. I believe Weiss's story takes place the earliest of them all, cause when you really stop and think about Weiss's story, it doesn't exactly make sense that it happened 6 to 8 months later. Think about it. She went that whole time without even seeing her brother. Jacques comes up with his plan to exploit his daughter's position half a year after the fact. It all seems to take place far too long for it to seem relevant. If I were to try and place Weiss's story, I would say it took place maybe 1-2 months after Volume 3. That's where I believe her story began. When she first runs into Whitley, he says this:
"A pleasure to see you out of your room for a change."
To stay locked in your room for about 6 months not interacting with her brother, and what appears to go the same for Klein, 6 months is a long time. Unless it didn't happen 6 months later. From the beginning of her story to the end of it, probably lasted about 1 to 2 months. A large portion of time going to her training, and the other her travel to Mistral. But I believe Weiss is the first member of Team RWBY to reach Mistral before anyone else got there. Blake, I believe to be the next chronological order of events. Does it matter? Honestly, not really, since her story seems to only be affecting her, which is totally fine. But once again, this falls into the "it seems a bit odd" category. Like Weiss's story, are we supposed to believe that Blake just wandered around for 6 months before hopping on a ship back to Menagerie? That and Sun was stealthily following her that whole time? Like Weiss's story, I believe it happened a few months after Volume 3. Like Sun said, Blake made sure everyone was okay, and then she bounced.
Once we landed in Vale, you made sure everyone was okay, and then you just took off without saying anything.
It's not a long time you need to make sure that those you care about are in safe caring, let alone multiple months. But like I said, her story doesn't exactly seem to affect or connect to her teammates' stories, so it's not exactly important to this particular theory. But since she is a member of Team RWBY, I felt it needed to at least be mentioned. Now Yang's story, I believe, started 4, maybe 5 months in or so, but ended around the time frame of the finale. Because like I said earlier, I believe Salem's storyline followed the episodes as they went. And in episode 1, Salem says this to the orb:
"Reinforce our numbers at Beacon. The relic is there."
Clearly, you would imagine that this is very recent, as the Grimm have overtaken Beacon, as seen towards the finale of Volume 3. But Yang's story, I believe, happened a bit later because of Port's line.
"Professor Goodwitch is working round the clock to restore Beacon to its former glory, but Mistral wasn't built in a day."
Glinda's getting things under control? Well, which is it? Are Salem's defenses being enhanced, or is Glinda getting a hold of things? This is why I believe the 2 stories happened months apart. Salem's closer to Volume 3, and Yang's closer to the end of the time skip. By the time we saw Yang, she appeared to be quote-unquote over the initial shock of losing her arm. She was just lounging around, not really as depressed as we saw her previously. So she's had time to come with terms to what has happened. So the time skip applies pretty well to Yang out of all the characters. And even when we do get to see her, all of her series of events seem to happen pretty close to one another. I would say probably the biggest time gap with Yang was her putting on that arm and that training fight we got with Tai. In terms of episodes, that was definitely the case, but in terms of time, I think it fits as well. And when you think about it, it's not that much time from putting on an arm and learning Tai's moves to spar with him. That's maybe a week or 2. Now obviously her travel to Mistral happens in a few quick scenes. Obviously that didn't happen that fast. The time Yang has been traveling is getting longer and longer. We're just not seeing it. So the months RWBY has been gone, Yang hasn't made up in a day. We just haven't been watching her travel as an audience. I do believe Yang is going to be the last of the 3 girls to reach Mistral, but ironically enough, I don't believe her story took place last per se. I believe Yang had left her home before RWBY got to Mistral, and by the time RWBY was in Mistral, Yang had already been on the go. So when RWBY was writing that letter, Yang had already been traveling for that unseen healing period with Crow. Now, out of all the events that happened, I believe Ranger's story happened last of all, for the most part. Team Ranger's story, like many of the others, seemed to happen one right after another. They come across Oniyuri, Crow gets poisoned, they make their way to Kuroyuri, then off to Mistral. There was no real time gap in between each event, which is why I think it happened last. But like I said, this is me placing the events. I do believe this would probably fit in the first series of events that happened. But I placed it near last because when RWBY is writing that letter, and it cuts to Tai, I got that feeling that Yang had only been gone for a short time, maybe a week or so. And it's because I believe Yang is going to be the last one of the 3 to arrive. RWBY writing that letter and Yang's arrival interweave with each other, making me think that it's the last stories to take place. I do think RWBY and Yang's stories intertwine with each other at certain points. I think Yang's story began a few months earlier, but at the end began lining up with RWBY's. So by the time RWBY was in Mistral, Yang had left, as previously said. Now there was a brief time skip with RWBY because Crow ended up healing from the poison. So by the time RWBY reached Mistral, Weiss was already there. Then once Crow healed, Yang's story became paralleled with RWBY's, making Yang the 3rd member of RWBY to arrive at the destination. When you stop and place everyone's story into one continuous tale, each one of their storylines seemed to happen over a matter of weeks. It was a continuous tale that each person was going through. There wasn't really any time for certain events to play out in between them or their stories. Volume 4 just seemed a little too coincidental with what was happening and when it was happening. Well, it seemed coincidental, but perhaps it was just stringed together to make it look that way. With that said, that is going to do it for this video. So what do you think? Do you think that each of their stories take place at different moments in time, making their reunion a little more believable? Or do you think that the events in the show happened as we saw them? Or do you have your own thoughts as to what happened? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe if you're interested in more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video.